Order. I call this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Human Resources. I'm Chris Palmer, MLA for Kings West and the chair of this committee. Today, in addition to reviewing the appointments to agencies, boards, and commissions, we will hear from the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the Affordable Housing Association regarding addressing the need for affordable housing and increasing housing supply in Nova Scotia. At this point, I'd like to ask everybody to please put your phones on silent, and in the case of an emergency, we will all use the Granville Street exit. At this point now, I'd like to ask all of our committee members, we'll go around the table, starting on my left, and ask all of our committee members to introduce themselves and their constituency.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone again. I'm Melissa Sheehy-Richard. I'm the MLA for Hants-Wes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dave Ritzie. I'm the MLA for Truro Bible Hill, Millbrook, and Salmon River.
Good morning. John A. McDonald, the MLA for Hants East.
Good afternoon. I'm John White. I'm the MLA for Glace Bay and Dominion.
Good afternoon. It's so good to see everyone. I'm Susie Hanson, the MLA for Halifax Needham.
Hello, Susan LeBlanc, MLA for Dartmouth North, and I'm filling in for Lisa Lachance.
Good afternoon, MLA Ali Douali, Halifax Armdale.
Hi everybody, I'm Braden Clark, the MLA for Bedford South.
Thank you, everyone. And for the purposes of Hansard, I also want to recognize the presence of Legislative Counsel Gordon Head to my left and Legislative Committee Clerk Judy Kavanagh to my right. We, in our Human Resources Committee, always have some business to do before we get to our witnesses, so we will be first addressing our agency boards and commissions appointments and just address a small piece of business before we move into our question and answer period. So do I have anybody from the, okay, John, MLA McDonald, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the Department of Advanced Education to the Cape Breton University Board of Governors, I move to recommend Kendrick Douglas, Adam Jameson, Sandra Konchak, and Nancy Sampson to be appointed as members.
There's a motion on the table. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion is carried. MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the Department of Advanced Education to the Research Nova Scotia Corporation Board of Directors, I move to recommend Ryan Grant and Jennifer Church be appointed as directors.
Motion on the table. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion is carried. MLA McDonald.
Mr. Chair, for the Department of Service Nova Scotia to the Board of Registration of Embalmers and Funeral Directors, I move to recommend Andrew McDiarmid, be appointed as member, funeral director.
Motion on the table. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion is carried. MLA McDonald.
And last but not least, Mr. Chair, for the Department of Service Nova Scotia to the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission, I move to recommend Robert Faulkner and Babatude Awagi be appointed as members. Oh, I was close.
Okay. Is there a discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Thank you, MLA McDonald. Before we get into our question and answer period, just one piece of business I will put forward is just acknowledgement of some documents that have been received from the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. The Deputy Minister has asked that these be acknowledged at this meeting, and I just wanted to, we all would have received that. MLA Douali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up with our agenda for ABCs. The committee have made requests for the council for the report. We have the report.
Yes.
I wish you look at my side. I've been raising my hand, but I just want to respond for that report. We're grateful for the report, and we would like to see this effort can be continue for the council. I just want to respond for the letter before we move the second agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, MLA Douali. So just wanted to put forward the, so do you want me to address that right now, or you're just sort of? Just because that was going to be on, it is on the agenda for after our committee meeting to discuss that correspondence. After the witnesses.
Okay.
Yep. We're good with that? All right, excellent. So I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge those documents sent by the Deputy Minister. We all have those. So at this point, I will now go into our topic for the afternoon, the need for affordable housing and increasing housing supply in Nova Scotia. I would like to ask all of our witnesses who are here today appearing to take a second and introduce yourselves across the table, and then we'll get into opening statements. So I'll begin on my left with Mr. Ward.
Hi, Brian Ward, Executive Director, Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency.
Good afternoon, Vicki Elliott Lopez. I'm the Senior Executive Director of Housing with the department.
Good afternoon, Byron Rafuse, Deputy Minister, Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Good afternoon, Pam Menchington. I'm the Executive Director of Client Services for the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency.
Good afternoon, Adrian Mason, Director of Housing Development and Partnerships with the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Michael Coblin, I'm the Executive Director at the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia.
Thank you all. And it just come to my attention that I probably should have, we acknowledged the documents sent by the deputy, but I will just read them aloud now so we have that. So the documents were Our Homes Action for Housing, a 5-year housing plan, Provincial Housing Needs Assessment Reports, key findings, the Deloitte Report on HRM Housing Development Barrier Review, the Progress Update, Oversight and Management of Government-Owned Public Housing, list of government housing announcements from 2021 to 2023, and Happy Pad testimonial. So I just wanted to make sure that those were all mentioned as and acknowledged that those were sent by the deputy. So we would like to invite those who would like to give an opening statement to provide one now, and we can begin with Deputy Minister Rafuse.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For all of those who don't know me, I'm Byron Rafuse. I am the Deputy Minister of the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and also the Interim CEO of the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency. Chair, over the last several weeks, I've had the opportunity to appear before the Public Accounts Committee multiple times related to the work of the department, specifically around the housing crisis. What I've taken from those opportunities, and what I believe I can safely say today, is that we all can agree on one thing. Everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to live. Over the past 2 years, the staff of my department and across government have been working collaboratively and diligently with others in government and community to understand the housing crisis and to respond in ways that address our significant needs both now and in the future. We know that increasing stock is the main cure for the crises. It really comes down to supply and demand. That is just not an opinion. That statement is backed by the evidence collected through Nova Scotia's first ever comprehensive housing needs assessment. This data represents the voice of over 20,000 Nova Scotians, one of the biggest sample groups that we've seen in a long time for data collected in Nova Scotia. With the help of this data, we've been able to chart a way forward which is laid out in the housing plan. A $1.7 billion investment over 5 years in housing solutions for all Nova Scotians. The plan is focused on increasing housing supply, growing and sustaining affordable housing, and delivering programs that people need. The need assessments told us that without intervention, we will have a gap of about 41,200 units by the year 27-28. The plan explains how we're going to fill that gap. And when we do, we expect housing prices and rental rates to respond. The housing plan is our roadmap for the way forward, but by no means have we sat idle while we develop the plan. Last week at our appearance of the public accounts, and as the chair has mentioned already, we provided the members of the committee with a document of all the housing announcements that we've done in our department for the last 2 years. When printed, this document is over 185 pages long. We did provide the document to this committee as well, as I said. That document showcases things like ways to cut red tape and to ensure development can proceed on as quickly as possible. It shows that we've almost tripled the investment in rent supplements and doubled the people we've helped in the last 2 years. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we announced program changes that will ensure more seniors will be eligible for a rent supplement, and those who are already receiving one will have more money in their pockets. It shows millions of dollars invested in the community housing sector to build their capacity to offer affordable housing options for the communities. Through programs like the Community Housing Acquisition Program and the Community Housing Infrastructure and Repair Program, we are giving nonprofits and community organizations the support they need, financially and otherwise, to preserve existing homes and strengthening organizations for further development and growth. The Community Housing Acquisition Program is unique in Nova Scotia, and as heard recently at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness Conference that was hosted recently here in Halifax, it is the envy of other jurisdictions. Just recently, we announced the Secondary and Backyard Suite Program, which incents people with up to $25,000 to share in the cost of building an affordable suite in their home or on their property to enhance staff. We are seeing significant interest in this program already, and it's only been on the books for about 3 weeks. We are investing in modular housing options for healthcare workers, additional housing for students, and temporary housing for people experiencing homelessness. And the Executive Panel on Housing and HRM has been hard at work creating the conditions to unlock 20,000 units to be built in Halifax over the next several years. Chair, we have taken significant steps to improve and enhance public housing in Nova Scotia with the creation of the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency last December. In fact, just 4 days ago, we acknowledged the one-year anniversary of the creation of the agency. In just 1 year of existence, the agency has made great progress in creating a new client service model, improvements to preserving existing stock, and investing in accessibility enhancements that will serve our most vulnerable residents. The agency also manages over 11,000 units, and you're likely aware of our recent announcement to add 222 new public housing units that will house 522 Nova Scotians. This alone is an $83 million investment. This is one of the largest investments in new housing builds since the 90s. Chair, I could continue on, but I will respect my time limit and look forward to sharing more details with our time here today. I will conclude in saying I know everyone in this room shares our vision for a strong Nova Scotia where all Nova Scotians will have access to safe, affordable housing that meets their diverse needs. I look forward to continuing our work to support Nova Scotians. We will now take your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Rayfuse. Before we get to our questions, I'd like to invite Mr. Cablin. I believe you had some opening remarks as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the Executive Director at the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, I believe our organization is uniquely situated to understand the quantum of the problem we're facing with our housing crisis, all the way from individuals who are currently experiencing homelessness to individuals who are just looking for an affordable place to live. We are builders, developers, acquirers of affordable housing in Nova Scotia. We are fortunate enough to be recipients of some of the many programs the Deputy spoke to make our growing portfolio of property possible. But we're also the local community entity for a federal program called Reaching Home. So we receive a block of funding from the federal government that is targeted towards reducing homelessness in our community. We make strategic investments in other organizations and infrastructure and services to help serve those and bring people out of homelessness in our community. By doing that, or in doing that, we are actually stewards of the data around those that experience homelessness in our community. And I want to throw some numbers at you because homelessness and the folks experiencing homelessness, I'm concerned, are not going to be able to rise out of their dilemma with the challenge, with the supply-based solutions. We need more for that community. And I do want to applaud the investments made by this government through the Department of Community Services for the folks that are in that sector. 1,068 people today in Halifax, where we keep, in HRM, where we keep that data, today are experiencing homelessness. It's not just a number. These are people who are, you probably walked past some of them today come into this building. These are people who are couch surfing, who are often in difficult situations. These are people who are struggling right now, and I think we want to put that face when we talk about the solutions we need, and these are the people we're trying to resolve. 765, another number. That's the number of people today that have been in that situation for 6 months or more. It's a long time. And the reason why we track that differently is because after 6 months, the outcomes become almost catastrophic. If you can resolve your homelessness within 6 months, you're typically risen out of that, and you won't return. But if 6 months or more go beyond, it is a catastrophe to your life, and it takes a lot more support for that individual. The last number, 263, are the active, what we call tri-comorbid. These are folks that need additional support. It's not just housing for them. It's wraparound supports. It's often medical, it's often counseling, it's support with addiction, support with mental illness, support with living with a disability that is required. But I want to rewind, because in October 2019, when we first started taking note of these numbers, the active number was 209. The chronic number was 134, and the tri-comorbidity was 113, just a few years ago. That's not this government's fault. That is a testament to how quickly the problem has grown and how, I think, complacent as a society we've been in paying attention and in responding in a meaningful way. So at AHANS, we advocate for the solutions and the type of investments that are required to help these individuals and help those that aren't captured in this data but that are afraid of being so. So thank you for your time, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. And I believe that's everybody that needs to make an opening statement, so thank you. We'll now proceed with our question and answer period. In our committee, we have a show of hands, and that's how I'll keep track of the MLAs who will be asking questions of you. So we'd like to remind you to please wait till I identify you before you begin to speak. That way your microphone comes on. We will do our question and answer period until 2:40, right? Yes, 2:40. And then will that allow for any kind of closing statements and some committee business we have to do after. So we will now proceed. I saw MLA Hanson, and I saw MLA White, and then MLA LeBlanc will begin. So MLA Hanson, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you did describe how the situation has worsened, Michael, excuse me, with AHANS. You did describe how it has worsened compared to this time last year. And it was reported this weekend that an individual living in a Dartmouth tent encampment died outside. Are you or any other organization tracking deaths in this community, and can you speak to the scope of this problem?
Mr. Kaplan.
Thank you, MLA Hanson, for the question. We are currently not tracking deaths in the data that we capture. I think that's a terrible situation with what happened. I think as a community, we're not the only service provider. In fact, we're not a frontline service provider. We are funding some of those frontline service providers. Unfortunately, it's not a statistic that ultimately it's a terrible situation. What we're tracking is about how are we doing with resolving the overall picture around homelessness. Unfortunately, that number comes out of the data, of course, but it's not currently tracked. A lot of people are doing a lot of good things, though, right? And there's so many good non-for-profit organizations. There's been so much investment and so much attention on the challenge that we're facing. The reality is it's still not enough, and it's a testament to when these things happen, how much more investment, how much more attention, how much more effort needs to happen in order to prevent these types of things from happening.
Thank you. MLA White.
Thank you, Chair. So the numbers that Michael laid out are staggering, absolutely, for sure. It's heartbreaking as well. I feel that there's been a lot of things that could have been done to prepare for this tsunami that's hitting us now, obviously. But I'm wondering if the department can tell us just how many units have been created or are being created through the Affordable Housing Development Program.
So maybe what I'll do is I'll look for you, Deputy Minister, to direct the traffic where you think the best person to answer that would be.
Mr. Mason?
Okay. So, Mr. Mason.
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to note that we have different programs targeted towards different people and different people's needs. The Affordable Housing Development Program is primarily focused, it's focused on all types of affordability, but it isn't specifically focused on deep affordability that would be targeting the type of people that Mr. Kaplan has just been referring to. The program, in answer to the question, last year it generated 308 new units, of which 225 were affordable. I think probably more noteworthy would be some of the other programs that are specifically targeted towards deeply affordable and supportive housing units. So one would be the Rapid Housing Initiative, which is actually a federal program but relies on provincial support. There's been 3 rounds of the program. In the first 2 rounds, the government spent $16.6 million, creating 195 supportive housing units. And we're currently in round 3, which the funding hasn't been finalised yet, but it's likely to generate an additional 63 units. The other program that's been that's targeting again the deeply affordable sort of vulnerable communities is the Community Housing Acquisition Program. So in the first year, that has loaned over 21 million to create 436 units, and 141 of those are being provided in partnership with our colleagues in Department of Community Services to provide deeply affordable supportive housing solutions. So that's just 2 of the programs that are targeted more specifically at that. And then there are other initiatives recently announced, a tiny home community over in Sackville, which will create another 52 units, and that's just shy of a $10 million investment.
Thank you. And for all committee members, I meant to mention that I will allow a follow-up if it's pertaining to your previous question. It's not an opportunity for another question. If it's another question, we'll go down the list again. But if it's a follow-up that's specific to your original question, I will allow for a follow-up. Okay. MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Catlin, I just want to clarify, when you talk about the 1,000 and, is it 17 today on the by name list?
1068.
1068, sorry. That by name list is for people who are living rough or sleeping rough, or does that include people who are living in shelters?
So,
Mr. Kaplan.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. Thank you. The 1,068 includes individuals living in shelter, individuals who could be living outside or living rough, as you described it at MLA LeBlanc. It could be people who are couch surfing. Essentially, that is the number that the system is capturing. People who are reaching out to shelters, to housing support workers, to people that are operating the homelessness support system and looking for help. It's likely the number is greater than that. It's actually it is definitely greater than that. Some people are dealing with their own homelessness if they're staying in a hotel, or they have the financial means, or they have family to stay with. This is when people have nowhere else to go, they turn to the system, and they show up in our data.
MLA LeBlanc for a follow-up.
Right. So, and we know, thank you for that clarification, but we know that that list is sort of, as you mentioned, limited to Halifax. So, but we also know that the crisis is more widely felt. Do you have any insight into what those kinds of numbers are for outside of the HRM?
Mr. Kaplan.
Mr. Chair, we don't currently track the data outside of HRM. Homelessness outside of the capital area looks much different. There is a lot more couch surfing and a lot more kind of on your own, in a sense. The system isn't as mature or as well supported. But you know, we are hearing about pockets right across this province in a lot of the central towns, you know, to point to Bridgewater has gotten a lot of media attention recently, but many other communities are still also facing this challenge. And so I wouldn't be safe to extrapolate on a particular number, but the problem is prevalent in every community in the province, and investment and support is required everywhere.
Thank you. MLA Ritzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question could be directed to the deputy, or you pass it along to who you see fit. It's around the modulars, and I guess are available for emergency housing. How many are being currently used by the wildfire victims and the flood victims?
Deputy Minister Rafuse.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Elliott Lopez to provide you a detailed question on that.
Ms. Elliott Lopez, you look surprised. Ms. Elliott Lopez.
Wrong person?
Yeah, that's okay. No, thank you for the question. Yeah, so right now we have 4 households using the modulars in Shelburne and Barrington areas, and we have 1 in Hammonds Plains area.
MLA Ritchie, any follow-up? Okay. MLA Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Kaplan, I just wanted to ask you about the issues related to homelessness as you were talking about. If we have 1,068 people in HRM and the government has announced plans to have 200 pallet shelters, 100 of them in the HRM, and that's obviously a good thing. And there are groups in Sackville, there are people here in Grand Parade Square. I just walked by today, I saw, there's new ice fishing tents that different groups have put up, and that's all wonderful, and no one's going to dispute that. But there's also, I think, a missing force and scale to move this problem, which is government in some ways. So I'm just curious, I don't think anyone would sit here and dispute that there is not enough physical space in HRM to have 1,000 people have somewhere to sleep. It's just a matter of where are those places, how does it work, what are all the nuts and bolts to make sure that people have somewhere safe and warm to sleep. Will it be perfect? No. But would it be better than being outside? I would argue yes. So I'm just curious what you think the government should be doing to get as many people off of the streets and into a warm, safe place over the winter, because we know these pallet shelters, for one, which is 10% of the problem, are not here and probably won't be here this calendar year. So when we get into January and February, the coldest months of the year, there will be hundreds and hundreds of people living outside. So where should those people go, and how do we move that process so that we're not talking about this again in May and June and July and saying, wow, if only we knew what we knew now? Thank you.
Mr. Kaplan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Emily Clark. The solution to homelessness is housing. It's not fishing tents, it's not pallet shelters, it's not camping, it's not someone's couch, it's not a shelter, a conventional shelter. It's more housing, it's more accessible, affordable, and in often cases supported housing. And unfortunately, despite the best efforts and the meaningful investments being made by government, it's still demonstrating it's not enough. And, we hear about millions. Unfortunately, the challenge is going to require billions. And I recognize the difficulty to procure that kind of money to resolve the challenge that we're facing. What you'll see is as we continue, as the community and with the support of government continues to add solutions, whether that be permanent supportive housing through the Community Housing Acquisition Program, whether that be shelter capacity or all the other responses that have been coming forward, that ultimately just identifies more people that need more help. We're housing people as quickly or less quickly than they're presenting needing support. And the longer that the problem goes on, the more that's going to continue. So what's the solution? It's more affordable housing, and the best way to do that is to make the investments that are necessary. I don't have a number, but based on our back of the envelope calculations as a community around homelessness, and those of us that are trying to house the folks that own affordable housing, that are just knocking at our office door every day saying, "You're A-hands, give me somewhere to live," and that's many people every day. We would put that number in the billions, not in the millions, unfortunately.
MLA Clark for follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that answer. And I certainly agree with you in terms of, as you say, of the number of people who are currently experiencing homelessness in HRM, maybe a quarter need extra support beyond housing. So sometimes I think we fool ourselves and think that it's you need 10 different steps to get there, and often, as you say, by far the most important thing is housing. So I agree with you there. I'm just curious, in the very, very short term, if you could do something, what do you think would be the most effective, very short-term steps that the government could take to make sure, again, we had a foot of snow 24 hours ago, that people aren't, separated from that snow by, an inch or two of canvas, and they actually have a roof over their heads. What would be the most immediate, practical, effective steps to achieve that? Thank you.
Mr. Kaplan.
I think we're seeing some of those investments being made in the temporary solutions that you're talking about. New shelter announcements continue to be made. It's not public in the media, but when bad weather like the snow we saw Sunday into yesterday comes out, the system has places to put people who need it in an emergency. The challenge is the system isn't necessarily always resourced well enough to grab everybody and get them inside, right? There is a responsibility of the individual, the way the system's currently designed, to go to the warming center, to go to the shelter that's added additional capacity, unless we're going to staff the homelessness support system so that we can go and bring those people in, or at least try and coerce them to come inside. So that's why I always say the solution is housing, because everything else is temporary. Everything else leaves the person vulnerable until they can find adequate, safe, and affordable housing.
Thank you. Our next three questions will come from MLA McDonald, MLA Sheehy-Richard, and MLA Hanson. So MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the biggest concerns I had after elected is the amount of deferred maintenance that I've heard over the years. So I believe on the buildings it was somewhere close to about $20 million roughly in October of 2021. And I would just like to know from the department, how much did we spend putting a dent into it since then, and where are we? And those would be my two questions. I snuck
Those two together. Okay.
But they relate.
Deputy Rayfuse?
I'm in a good afternoon here. I'm going to defer this to Brian Ward.
All right. Mr. Ward.
Yes, thank you for the question. So yeah, public housing, significant deficit in the assets as far as on the maintenance side. So I just have a quick little update here. So in 23-24, the housing agency will roll out approximately 870 projects over 260 public housing buildings. We're spending $43.7 million operating and capital budget. 19.8 million of that is just on our operational capital asset management program. We had 19.1 million in our TCA that was recently announced. 2.2 capital asset management program for single family homes and duplexes. 1.3 million on interior renewals, and another 1.3 million on preventative maintenance. We also have a 8.6 million on accessibility improvement program across the province. So we're focused on preserving and stabilizing existing housing stock. As you may know, average age of housing stock in Nova Scotia is 42 years old. One of our most recent buildings was built in the 90s. So, and our oldest building that currently doesn't have any tenants is over 200 years old. So we do have housing stock that needs to be replenished, and the new announcement for the 222 units will certainly is a step forward on that, the 80 million. So we're focusing on existing stock with a multi-capital year management plan, and we also have funding coming from the National Housing Strategy and the bilateral agreement with the federal government. So we're building on a 10-year program to identify short and long-term options and renewal of our public housing portfolio. We're setting our new targets and outcomes. We're improving building systems, reducing energy consumption, and we're enhancing operations and maintenance in our buildings. In the next year, we're going to start to work on our preventive maintenance and operational standards. And we're focused in right now on really on our vacancies to ensure that our vacancy rate stays extremely low. We're down around, I believe it's around 2.7. So we're well below the 3% that we have for our standards. So we continue to focus on that. We've created teams in the province. That's their main role, is to do unit turns. And then we have other teams who go in and do typical maintenance items like toilets and sinks and fixing windows and that sort of thing. So let me see, under the Canadian Infrastructure Program, we have 93 projects that are retrofits underway, 39 projects that are about 90% complete, 9 projects that are in the 60-70%, 8 jobs that are just kind of in the 10 to 40%. We have upgrades in 200 public housings in Cape Breton with heat pumps. We have 171 projects completed out of 160 in the 1,911 units impacted under the Canadian investment, so that was between 2019 and 2023. Efficiency, we have an agreement with Efficiency One. There's over 400 energy efficient projects that we're working on. We've had a cumulative savings of over 8.4 million kilowatt hours. We've reduced our emissions an average of 136 tons of CO2 annually. And we've had an energy reduction that translate over $1 million saved cumulatively in utility cost. So as you can see, we continue to look at projects that will help us with our efficiency in the portfolio, but we still have 42-year-old buildings out there that we're trying to make efficient. Total rebates, we've claimed pretty close to $500,000 in rebates. The accessibility is probably the biggest thing that we've done this year with the 220 units. 80 of those units will be accessible out of those 222 public units in the 4 communities we identified. So investments planned in the preservation of existing public housing infrastructure for the 22 and 23 fiscal year have nearly doubled by those made in previous governments over the last 12 years. So that's pretty much our investments, if that answered your question.
There was lots of information in there, so I'm sure your questions were answered somewhere, MLA McDonald. Thank you, Mr. Ward, for that information. Thank you, Mr. Ward. MLA Sheehy-Richard.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ward, for that. Not to keep you in the hot seat, but I do think you piqued my interest there. I had a different question in mind, but just so I can pick up on that, you mentioned that the vacancy rate is at 2.7%. I think I jotted it right. And I can remember first being elected, and I think it was Christmas time, and my biggest thing was people coming in telling me, oh, there's a vacant unit and it's been vacant, and why is that the case? And I can actually remember community rallying together to go clean out a home so that we could get people in faster. And I think I remember that Minister Lohr himself was working on some units. So I guess my question is, like, a vacancy rate at any point isn't great. I mean, we would love to see that they would be at 0, but reality is there's maintenance, as you just listed, in that huge list. But can you tell me, like, is it a comparable of what the vacancy rate was prior? Because I think you said it's gotten down to the 2.7%. So I was just curious if you had the number of what it was.
Mr. Ward.
Thank you. Thank you. I was corrected, apparently. It's 2.1 is our vacancy rate. It's reduced from 2.3 in October. Sorry. 2.1. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. It'll take me a minute, sorry. Maybe Pam has the answer.
Okay,
yeah.
Ms. Menchenton.
Yeah, so it's currently at 2.1%. About a year ago, it was at 4%. So it's quite a reduction.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up, MLA Sheehy-Richard, to that question?
And was it consistently 4% prior to last year, or was it a different number again? Like, are you seeing, like, in the last couple of years it coming down? Like, what was that rate, for example, when I had the people coming in saying, you know, why are these units empty? I guess that's maybe, do you know that?
Ms. Menchenton.
Thank you. It was hovering around between 4 and 5% pretty consistently, and we made some pretty dramatic changes when we came in. It became an agency. So in the last year, we've been able to reduce that to about 2.1, which is a historic low, actually, for public housing.
Thank you. MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is to Michael. Yesterday, the town of St. Stephen's, New Brunswick declared a state of emergency over their homelessness crisis, calling on the provincial government to provide immediate funding and resources to address the crisis. Do you think similar measures are necessary here in Halifax?
Mr. Cablin.
Thank you. I don't think calling on the government to make investments is necessary. We've been doing that for years now. I think what's necessary is additional investment. I think, just to pause, this government has made some of the most significant investments in generations in affordable housing and towards resolving homelessness. The challenge is it's been after many, many years of relatively low and no investment. And so, you know, it's almost like we have to play catch up, and to do so, it needs more investment. That's where we're at. So, you know, it's you know, there's lots of metaphors and similes you can use to that, which I don't like to get into. But yeah, we've been doing a lot more than we've been doing, but it's still not having the impact that's needed to turn the crisis in the direction where we're making progress.
Emily Hanson, did you have a follow-up for that? No?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I have MLA Dwally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is pertaining the executive of the Director of the Client Service, Pam, and I also like to acknowledge the people who are sitting here today making the testimony for your service. I read some of you, and you know, Nova Scotia and this city is a small town, and a lot of you do good things and have been in the public service long enough. And I really believe you're the right place, and I'm very optimistic you're going to do the right things. Having said that, what's in front of us is a challenge that nobody have expected. And I met members of the community talking about the condition we are, and some of them have been raising this 20 years and predicting this is coming. Unfortunately, nobody pay attention. Here we are today, and we're speaking today. One of the things that hit my heart today, it was in the news, and is in terms of the client service. And we saw in the news a building that's old enough and people living there but have been crying for service and asking for service. So my question is, what are in place that, because these people are client, they pay rent, they're not different than anybody else. But the way they treat it, they don't feel that way. So my question is, what is in place that are measurable and people are given the service that they deserve? Thank you.
So is that directed to the department, MLA Dwally?
Should I ask Dan, if I'm not making a mistake?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ms. Minchetin.
So we're developing right now a new client services strategy that will include some of those measures that you speak about. We've been in place now for about a year. There's a whole lot of things that we're changing. There's a whole lot of things that we're tightening up and make better. I'm very sorry to say that some of the client service has not been great in the past. Some of it's been terrific, but I don't think we've been consistent in how we've been delivering that. So that's something that we want to address as we go forward. And like I said, we are developing a new client services strategy and hope to have that in place hopefully by the spring. So that's something that we are developing with measures, as you say. But anytime a client or a tenant has an issue or a concern, I hope that they would come to us as their landlord. That's what we do. We're there to help. We're there to address the concerns and fix the faucets and, you know, unclog the toilet and resolve. Sometimes there's some tenant issues that we are there to help with as well as, you know, if there's community services that we can link to for, you know, it could be any range of things, mental health concerns or addiction issues or so forth. I mean, we're there to help link community services to help our clients and our tenants as well.
MLA Dwally for a follow-up.
Thank you. Actually, I'm very great, and you know, and this is the reason that actually I raised this question, just to see your title, because quite honest, you know, in my constituency, I do have the housing district in my constituency, and most of the phone calls that I get are pertaining people who are not being given the service that they deserve. Not only that one, even as a human being, being respected. And I'm happy you mentioned this office is created and is going toward to give the client the service they deserve. But also, you know, most of the people are either low income, some health issues. Also, we have a lot of newcomers. And I encourage your department and your office and your leadership, there should be in place how to serve the people and how to deal with their personal issues. So I'm grateful to hear that this is a service that are new, but I really like to see in the future an action plan that are actually showing there is a measurable ideas that will satisfy the people that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three questioners will be MLA LeBlanc, MLA White, and MLA Clark. MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you very much. Hello again. You know, you just talked about how the price tag of really addressing the affordable housing needs is in the billions. And, you know, I just went to a press conference with the Auditor General this morning where, you know, she referenced the I forget the number now, $1.7 billion surplus spend of additional appropriations after the budget debate last year. I mean, there is money to spend. We have a big tax windfall due mostly to higher population here. So we know that we need more affordable housing. We know that there's some money. So in your opinion, then, what barriers are there to building more non-market housing? Or like, and if it's not just money, then like, you know, what do you see as the reason why the money's not being spent or how it's being spent or whatever? And how can you and other not-for-profit providers be better supported by the government?
Mr. Kevlin.
Just want to finish writing down the second part of the question.
Second part of the question.
Yeah, there are two questions there, I think. The first was...
Also, the witnesses said there's two questions, so this is it. Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, MLA LeBlanc. I think one of the biggest barriers is capital in our community. So I know a lot of attention has been placed on the need for public housing. We've got people doing great work in public housing, and I think to note the provincial government is and will likely be for many, many years to come the largest owner, operator, and provider of affordable housing through that system. I'm not sure I advocate for more of it, though, and I know that doesn't make me necessarily popular in my community, because as you've heard about deferred maintenance and you've heard about an operating loss, if you haven't, I'm sure you will, and the reason for that is simply because of the age and because of the lack of meaningful investment that hasn't been made for many, many years. So we advocate in our community, in the non-for-profit community, that we're the path to creating a scalable, meaningful portfolio of what we call forever affordable housing, but it requires capital. We don't have the funds in our sector to go out and compete with the largest developers who have almost unlimited access to capital to go and buy the best development sites, to go out and acquire a building and convert it to housing. And even the existing programs require us to have some level of equity. And you know, our perspective is our careers are equity in this. And so, you know, many organizations have a professional fundraising arm and can do that, but most don't in our sector. And I think the further you get out of the capital region, the more difficult that is. So access to capital so we could go out and compete with the private sector to acquire the opportunities to build that forever affordable housing is one of the biggest barriers. We're seeing the other barriers come down, things like the timelines that it's often taken historically for both the provincial and federal governments to get back to us when we apply to the programs that apply to our sector. Those are coming down. But then all the other barriers we face outside of capital really are about scale. So because we have so many relatively small non-for-profit operators, it takes, you know, somewhere around 200 to 300 units. Something happens in an organization where they have that professional and organizational capacity to kind of continue to grow and to scale. Below those numbers, you're kind of always playing catch up. You're just not collecting enough overhead. So there's a question of scale. That's not to kind of minimize a lot of the smaller organizations that exist across this province that are trying to do a single development in their community. But when you get to scale, it's a different type of operation, and you can grow. So how can we be better supported by government? I think is the second part of that question, is access to that capital, and not necessarily debt, and not necessarily the things that register as debt, like forgivable loans, but that kind of money up front. One of the things that we would advocate for is underwrite our organizations up front. And fund us, and then hold us accountable. Underwrite me as an executive director at AHANS, and you can look at my taxes and my credit if you have to, and I'll put my own reputation on the line so we can have access to that capital to go out and compete with the private sector and build at the scale. If we had capital, we could compete with some of the best developers in our community to make a forever affordable housing. The last point is, I know it would be expensive for government, but the difference is you're going to pay for it once, and then we're going to operate it financially sustainably forever. We do that through the grants that we get, but also the way we build. So the most recent development under construction through AHANS is completely net zero. It creates actually more electricity than it needs to operate. And so that essentially reduces one of the greatest pressures to operating housing, which is your electrical and your heating bill. So if you don't have to pay that, all of a sudden we can have predictability for a generation in what our operating costs are going to be, and continue to provide deep affordability for quite a long time.
Thank you. MLA White.
Thank you, Chair. That's a good question to follow up, actually, because it's kind of related to partnering with outside organizations and the general public, actually. So it's about the land for housing use. I wonder if you can give us some idea on the criteria for that, and maybe if there's any proposals that have been awarded or any update on that.
Deputy Rayfuse.
I'm going to hand that off to Mr. Mason.
Mr. Mason.
Thank you for the question. Yes, the Land for Housing initiative started last year, so we're still early days. We've been slowly identifying parcels of land across the province that we feel would be suitable for housing development, and making those parcels available to either private developers or community housing organisations, in exchange for the land being used obviously for housing, but most importantly for affordable housing as well. There has to be an affordable housing component. To date, we have released 28 what we call property opportunity notices, and in fact I believe there's another 4 that are due to go out this week. We've received 20 proposals. We currently have approved 10 projects to move forward. Unfortunately, 2 of those may not be proceeding any further, but 8 are proceeding, and they should deliver around about 522 new units as things stand at the moment. That does change in time. I mean, these projects are very early stages, and so things do change as they move forward. Sometimes they grow in size, sometimes they contract. But at the moment, as things stand, it should deliver about 522 new units, and of that, about 245 will be affordable. So it's being an effective program. It's another tool to help grow and sustain the community housing sector. Of the 8 that have been approved to move forward, the majority of them, 5 of them, are with community housing groups, and 3 with private developers. So we hope that it's a useful tool that's going to help organisations such as the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, build and grow to that sort of that scalable kind of critical mass that Mr. Capbellan referred to. And yeah, does that answer your question?
MLA White for a follow-up.
Thank you. It's good information, but I'm wondering about the, I kind of want it out there for the public to see. So for a private developer, what commitment is it that you mentioned for affordable housing option? Like, I know it's a percentage of the units. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that so people know the opportunities out there for them?
Mr. Mason.
Thank you. Yeah, so the priority for us, and the priority for any applicant, whether they be a private developer or a community housing group, is that the project is financially viable. So there's always a balance between the amount of affordability that can be offered versus the long-term sustainability of the project. So naturally, we're looking for social outcomes, so that the higher the affordability, or the amount of affordability that's being offered, then the more attractive that proposition would be to us. But we also need to know that the project can be delivered realistically is of a scale which is appropriate and likely to happen, and that it's going to be sustainable, over the long term, over a 20-year plus, term. So, typically speaking, the amount of affordability we'd expect to see in a proposal is anywhere from 25% of the units up to about 50% of the units. It's very rare that we see proposals offering more than 50% of the units being affordable also be financially sustainable. So there is a balance point. Occasionally it happens, but rarely. So it's typically between 25 and 50%.
Thank you. MLA Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask the department about rent supplements. It was something that Deputy Rayfuse, you mentioned in your opening comments, and as we know, the income thresholds were changed from 30% of income to 50% of income, which I believe was a mistake, and we've introduced legislation on that. And I think, just this morning, actually, I was meeting with someone who lives in my riding, which is majority renters, and she spends 46% of her income on rent and is not eligible anymore as a result of these changes, which I think is really a shame. And so I'm wondering if the department is considering changing that threshold back to 30%, which also, lines up with the CMHC definition of affordability. Thank you.
Deputy Rayfuse.
Thank you for that. And I just a brief comment before I hand it off to Vicky to get into the details on it. That we're constantly looking at our programs to see if refinement is necessary or needed to get at the target aspect of the program. So yeah, the rent supplement program parameters were changed. We will continue to look at that. I can't say that whether or not we're going to revisit that threshold, but there's other aspects of the program that perhaps needs some adjustments to get at the public policy objective of that program. But I'll ask Vicky to explain a little bit more as to why we made the change and the outcome associated with that.
Ms. Elliott Lopez.
Thank you for the question. We changed the threshold to 50% based on just the sheer number of applications that were coming through the door, and understanding that our agreement with CMHC is to target those most in need. And when we looked across at other jurisdictions before we made any changes to the program, what we realized was that Nova Scotia actually had one of the most robust, if not the most robust program in the country. Others were very targeted. They were targeted toward, those who were working, so no income assistance clients, or those only with disabilities, or some other segment of the population. And in order to continue to meet those targets of those most in need, we did limit it to 50%. We will continue to make policy changes, as the deputy said, as a great example of that. We recently raised the amount of funding and eligibility for seniors from 95% of AMR up to 100%. And so that means more seniors qualify, and that means more money in their pockets. And we'll continue to do refinements to the program. And if at some point in the future, I think our minister has also said, if at some point in the future we have the ability to move that marker in a different direction, then we absolutely will. He's called on our federal government on a number of occasions to increase the amount that they contribute. Currently, we're contributing over $40 million to their 10, and we would look to the federal government to increase their funding toward the program.
MLA Clark for a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just on the last point I mentioned in my first question, which was around CMHC definitions of affordability. And I know this is something that's come up in the past, but I find it very difficult to assess kind of performance and how we're doing if we don't have a universal definition of what we say affordable housing. It's very easy to say that term, and I certainly use it all the time, but affordable is what you can afford, right? And that's contextual in some cases, but if we don't know kind of what benchmarks we're working towards, it's hard to measure progress. So CMHC might say it's 30% of your income. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in some of the rent supplements programs, you might be looking at 80% of market rent for the area, which is very different in Dartmouth versus Bedford versus Halifax versus the Eastern Shore. In some places, you're looking at 30% of your income versus 50%. So all of these numbers are out there. So it's hard for anyone to really say, well, are we creating enough affordable housing if we don't agree on what we mean by affordable housing. So I'm wondering, what do we mean by affordable housing, I guess, if I can put it as simply as that. Thank you.
So Deputy Rayfuse.
Thank you for the question. I think your question answered it, because what is affordable is dependent on the individual and the circumstances of which they're in. And so it's very difficult to nail it down to one thing. In fact, if we do limit to one definition of affordability, then that definition won't work in certain programs. And if you look at the way in which we work with developers or community groups to have a certain amount of units that are 80% of market or area market rates, then it gets into difficulty about, okay, then how does one anticipate the expected income of a future tenant? So it's really hard to tie those two together. So we have to use different definitions for different programs to achieve the policy objectives of those programs.
Thank you. MLA Sheehy-Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to the public housing units that you do manage, and I wrote 870 and he wrote 860, but somewhere in the vicinity of definitely over 850 are receiving projects in 23-24. So in total, like, how many public housing units do you manage, and do you have a breakdown of like how many are in each district?
Mr. Ward. We'll go to our numbers guy. Mr. Ward.
Sorry. I was looking for the red ring. So we have 11,200 public housing. Let's see the breakdown units. In Metro, there's 3,723. Cape Breton, there's 3,195. Northern, there's 2,104. And in Western, there's 2,148.
Is there a follow-up, MLA Sheehy-Richard?
Well, I think it is a follow-up. So of the ones that were announced, like, have you determined where those will be added? Like, are they going to be expansions of what we already have in that 11,200, or are they going to be in similar locations, or are they being dispersed as well, or are they in one central location?
Yeah. Mr. Ward.
So the new public housing that was announced, the areas have been identified, and I have those here somewhere. There's some here in Halifax, Bridgewater, Wolfville, and in Cape Breton. And those public housing units will be built on existing sites where we have existing buildings.
Thank you. MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to ask just something of the department. It's been talked about policy changes, and I know that there's a client services strategy that's going to be, that you're working on. It would be lovely if we were able to have a copy of those policy changes, because we know that with our clients, you know, what we have is what we have. And if we don't know what those policies are, we can't reinforce some of the things that public housing is looking to make those changes to. So I'd like that, Mr. Chair, if we could get the policy changes from the department so that we can kind of be on the same page.
So are you asking one of them to answer that question? Or?
Well, I'm just asking it of the department, just a list of the policy changes that to be tabled.
Well, I think we could go to the clerk and ask for that to be maybe sent to the clerk.
I just wanted to ask that because I know there's a lot of things that we do as MLAs that would help us do this work. And my question is...
who's your question?
My question will be to the department.
Okay.
So recently, the government removed the ability to provide a statutory declaration in place of a lease when applying for a rent supplement. There are many reasons why people may not have a lease. I'm just wondering, can you clarify that policy, and how many people have been denied because they don't have a lease since this change is made?
So I'll look to the deputy to direct.
I'm going to direct to Ms. Elliott Lopez.
All right. Ms. Elliott Lopez.
Thank you for the question. So what we did was we made it an exception rather than a rule. So in the past, anybody could come in and say that they had a lease. We didn't look for proof of that lease. And as a result of a review of our program and ensuring that we have measures in place to ensure, again, that those who need the program are getting it, we made it more of an exception and a rule, but we still have that in place that we will accept.
Emily Hansen, do you have a follow-up?
Then has anyone been denied because they haven't provided a lease?
Ms. Elliott Lopez.
I'll have to get back to you on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three questioners will be MLA McDonald, MLA LeBlanc, and MLA Ritzy. So MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Michael had great conversation before we started. I just remember you mentioned the community housing acquisition program, and I'm pretty sure your group was received funding for 12 work units. Can you give me an update on that?
Mr. Kabelin.
Yeah, we use the Community Housing Acquisition Program, and it's a unique partnership between the Department of Municipal Affairs and the Department of Community Services, where we can effectively receive 100% of the financing, and the Department of Municipal Affairs does the mortgage, so to speak, and Community Services covers all the operating costs. We partnered with another agency. We haven't formally announced that partnership, so I'll leave them out of it at this point, but they provide the wraparound supports that we've talked about, and then we provide the landlording, so to speak. We maintain the building, we have the leases with the tenants, and we believe that's actually a best practice model where one organization is the landlord, another organization is there as the support and the advocate for the individual. So when those two things come into conflict, everyone plays their role and the individual doesn't feel left behind by their landlord or by their support. That's a great program. Unfortunately, it only works for vacant buildings, so we can't use that partnership, and we wouldn't in good faith displace people to use that partnership to grow our portfolio. We wouldn't want to vacate a building of people who are paying likely more affordable than market rents to then house individuals who are experiencing homelessness, right? So what we're looking for is net new when we advocate for more housing and more affordable housing, and so one of the limitations for that partnership in particular, without capital, is you need a vacant building to make it work, and you would, and only in good conscience, use a vacant building. The CHAP program is good as well if you have that capital that I was talking about, because it requires the not-for-profit to have 20% of the purchase price if you don't do that unique partnership with community services, and so that is a barrier for us as an organization that just has very limited access to capital right now. We spent all our money to buy what we've currently got, and we're not a professional fundraising organization where we have this income coming in all the time. So yeah, CHAP's a great program. The barrier is if we want to grow at scale, we can only do so by finding vacant properties at this stage.
Emily McDonald for a follow-up.
Yeah, just Michael, what's the status on the 12 units? You missed that portion.
Mr. Kabelin.
So we acquired that building in the end of August. It went through some renovations to take it from its previous use as a purpose-built Airbnb, and we moved the first tenants into that building on the 1st of December, just this past Friday. So all 12 women moved in, and all 12 of those women would be housing insecure. To tell you any more about that would likely lead you to who the support organization is. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kabelin. MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Kabelin. I have another question for you. So a survey conducted this summer found that 22.5% of those who were sleeping rough reported that they lost their home or their housing situation due to a rent eviction or a fixed-term lease ending. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that. Is that something that you are hearing more widely? What role do you think inadequate protections for renters is playing in this housing and homelessness crisis?
Mr. Kabelin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I think the challenge around changing the Residential Tenancies Act so broadly presents other issues, right? So as a non-for-profit provider, for example, we're often dealing with individuals who have been housing insecure for a long time. And so we often will start with a fixed term lease so that we have a conversation at the end of that term to ensure that this is the right and the adequate housing solution for them. So to broadly say fixed term leases are a problem, I think there's lots of good reasons why a fixed term lease should be used. But you're right, a lot of folks are only using them because it's easier to deal with turning their tenants over and also getting their rents increased. So I think a more articulate conversation as kind of as a society and through a legislative process around fixed term leases is likely required. But to say they're all bad, I think, is also an overstep. Around rent eviction, I think there's already been measures by this government put in place to kind of prevent that, and there's been changes. Unfortunately, it does still continue. The most affordable unit we can create are the ones that already exist, and we're actually losing at a much more quickly pace than we're building, or than we're acquiring as a community housing sector. So it's certainly retention and prevention of rent evictions, or I think instead of stopping rent evictions, again, I talk about empowering our sector to buy those naturally occurring affordable housing properties and keep them affordable forever is a better way to go. But the story of how someone falls into homelessness is as you say, we often assume somebody falls into that. At the start, I talked about the three categories of kind of people, and the most in high need is about a quarter of the number. You don't start there and then lose your homelessness. More often than not, something has happened, you lose a job, a catastrophe happens in your life, a relationship breaks down, you're fleeing an abusive situation, and you were otherwise what some people would call living a normal life until that happened to you. Then you fall into homelessness, and then as time goes by, your situation becomes more and more desperate, and then you begin to acquire things like dependence on some type of substance, or then you acquire mental illness from the trauma that you've been living through, or then you acquire disability from the harsh conditions you've been living with. So it's more often than not people fall from a stable situation into homelessness and then acquire the type of stereotypical things we think that all individuals experiencing homelessness are living through than it is someone developed a dependence on a substance and then falls in homelessness. It's the inverse. You typically experience homelessness first, and then you have the problems that we tend to look to people to be need those supports to come out of. And so, that's where I think when you're pointing around rent eviction and losing of your housing, that's one of those kind of catastrophes in this market where there's not a lot of turnover that we would hope we can prevent.
Thank you. Emily LeBlanc for a follow-up.
Yeah, and so thanks. So that's I think that's a really kind of astute point, which is that we need to prevent those things from happening to sort of cut off the extending trauma and what can happen, as you say, after 6 months or thereabouts. And I guess and I also really do take your point about the fixed term leases. I absolutely do. I guess in my world, and the people that come to see me, it's generally people whose landlords are taking to those because they see that is a way to get around the rent cap. And so I guess I'd love to know your opinion then, therefore, on this enforcement branch of residential tenancies, which we've been calling for. We hear it's coming, but it's taking an awful long time. Like, what impact would an enforcement branch have on this whole ecosystem of homelessness?
Mr. Kabelin.
Chair, and thank you, Emily LeBlanc. I think that's getting so the landlord-tenant relationship is inherently a power imbalance, right? The landlord has more power than the tenant, and so the enforcement branch actually brings the dispute resolution to the place of housing, right? So it helps break a barrier down in one instance. So that's one of the biggest reasons we do advocate for it. I think the private landlord organization also advocates for it. In jurisdictions where it exists, where the dispute resolution happens at place of housing or nearby, we see the disputes resolved much more quickly. We see a lot of the abuse that you were alluding to kind of evaporate in a sense, right? Imagine if you had to go to the police station for every problem you had. No, you call the police and they come to you. In a similar fashion, that's why I think the advocacy for the enforcement branch exists. You know, in New Brunswick, they have something called the rentals person, I'll call it, but in a sense, that role does that. And in jurisdictions where it exists, it works well. Unfortunately, it'll have to be backed up with the appropriate legislation to give that branch the tools and the power it needs to resolve those issues. So I think that's the delay, right? The folks at Justice need the time they need to give the unit the legislative backing. And the Residential Tenancies Act, again, it finds balance. Every time a change is made, eventually it finds balance, and so those changes can't be made too quickly or or it can have unintended consequences. So I think, yeah, it's needed, and I think, you know, as quickly as our colleagues at Justice can move, we'd invite it to the next legislative session if possible.
Thank you. MLA Duale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is the Deputy Minister, and I know you've been put in this position not that long ago, but also I'm wondering, we know this government have made intention to double the population of this province. And I hate to criticize when good things are being mentioned. As a newcomer, as an immigrant, I'm in favor for immigration issues. But at the same time, I do have a concern. And I really, sometimes even I see in the eyes of the public, to give you an example, I have a member of my constituents who have front of her house encampment, and she believes the reason these people are homeless is because of immigration. And our vision to double the population and our vision for immigration, and that hit my heart. And that's not true. That's not true. But that's a perception that we're creating. So I'm wondering, as your role, what is your relationship with those departments who are making decisions that would have an impact for the housing of this province? And what is those are in place, and what was your role, not of you, but your department, for this kind of visions and this kind of ideas? Thank you.
Deputy Rayfuse.
Thank you for the question, and it's unfortunate, but unfortunately, I've heard the same stories about immigrations and them being the problem here, and quite frankly, I think that is a short-sighted view of the world. We recognize, the government recognizes, that immigration is necessary. It's needed. The goal to double the population is not one just as an aspirational goal. It's a goal to help make the province grow. It allows us to provide the services that are needed for the citizenship. If you look at healthcare, we need immigration to deliver the healthcare that we have to do. We need immigration to actually help build the houses that we need. So it can create a friction point. It is being recognized that it can create a friction point. There is a group of deputies that I work with on an ongoing basis. We work with our partners with community services and elsewhere for housing needs in general, but also the senior level deputies work on how do we plan for growth. And it's been recognized that for years Nova Scotia did not plan for growth. In fact, we planned for a steady state or maybe even decline in population, and that has shifted, and the thinking has to shift. And the government recognizes that we have to be a little more forward-looking in our planning initiatives, but also a little bit more out there in our communications with the citizenry as to why we're doing certain things. And one of those would be the importance of immigration and the importance of welcoming newcomers as the solution, not a problem.
MLA Duale, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So what is the vision for your office to make this accommodation and this vision to be successful? You're deputy of the minister of this role, specifically for the housing. Would you be able to share the committee what are the plans that will assure this will not have an effect within our communities, and to create a situation that people actually will react differently. So I just like to know, what are the visions that are part of your leadership that will make sure this vision will not have a ripple effect? Thank you.
Deputy Minister Rayfuse.
Certainly, I think there's actually probably about three aspects that I can speak to. First of all, part of the actions is the housing plan itself. It is an action plan that sets targets for ourselves and for the province to address the housing shortage, and the steps that we're willing to take to help incentivize that progress. So we need to work in that sphere. My dual role, this is also on municipal affairs. We work quite closely with our municipal partners, not only to address their, I'm going to call it their infrastructure needs, but also to help them work with other partners and with ourselves on welcoming programs for newcomers. They realize that they need to address their needs and their population shortages through immigrations, and we're helping them out through that regard. More broadly speaking, though, when I talk about the senior levels of government, our deputies that work on systemic issues and how we plan for the future, that will be more messaging or work done on from all government departments, and including the communications of which, when we speak to the citizens of Nova Scotia about why government is doing certain things, why immigration is important, why it's helpful to be welcoming, how to encourage employment activities for newcomers, which allows them to be able to afford the housing that's necessary for those things. So that's kind of more, I'm going to call it more a systemic or comprehensive view of the world, and that's being led out of the ECO, or the Chief Deputy's Officer, Deputy Minister's Office.
Thank you very much. MLA Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to make a comment. Deputy Rayfuse, you mentioned the need to plan for growth, and I think that's absolutely essential. And I think you're right that over a couple of decades, when we were dealing with stagnant growth or decline in a lot of places, we got used to that. And turning the switch like that is difficult for sure. And I see it particularly in my riding, which is growing like gangbusters, and that's great. But last week we had an announcement of a special planning area that was approved in my riding, 2,060 units, so 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people, let's say. Awesome. I am not in any way opposed to that, but there are issues, of course, with planning, with transportation, with transit, with schools in particular. So seeing all of those levels of government and departments working together is absolutely essential, or we get perceptions that population growth is the root cause of our problem, which we all agree is not the case. So just that's a bit of an editorializing on my front there, Mr. Chair. But
question?
Yes, question. Thank you. But I think it's important. So I just wanted to ask, and you mentioned you kind of have two hats with municipal affairs and housing, and obviously municipalities have a key role to play with housing, because the province and the federal government can spend as much money as they want on housing, but in many cases, in all cases, it's the municipality that decides where housing goes and what's legal where, which is critical. So if we look to other provinces, like BC in particular, I think over the last few months, BC has done some really interesting things on housing as it relates to municipalities. Here, I think we took a bit too much of a heavy-handed approach with HRM, and we were clear on that. With BC, they said, well, let's set a deadline a year in advance. These are the provincial zoning minimums that we are going to set across the province of British Columbia. You have to meet these minimums. You can go higher if you want, and that's great, but you have to meet these minimums by June 2024. BC is doing that. New Zealand has done that. The state of Oregon. Lots of places are starting to move to this front where it makes it easier for municipalities. We have a lot of small municipalities, as we know, who might not have capacity to deal with these issues. And if we have kind of a baseline across the board, consistency, I think it will help lead to more housing being built faster, which I know is the government's goal. So I'm just wondering, Deputy, are you familiar with that kind of approach in terms of provincial zoning minimums? Is this something the province is considering? Have you learned anything from what other provinces might be doing on this issue? Thank you.
Deputy Rayfuse.
And thank you for the question. And certainly, we always take the opportunity to observe what's going on elsewhere to see if there's aspects of what they're doing that would be beneficial to the province here. There are minimum guidance in the Municipal Governance Act as to what a municipality needs to do for its planning purposes, and we continue to work with them on that. There are some capacity issues with some municipalities, both from a planning perspective to address the necessary bylaws to put in place for proper zoning in their areas. But there's also a recognized need on the infrastructure need side of the house, particularly on wastewater aspects and in transportation, that additional support can be provided. That's why if you've looked over the last couple of years, when incremental money that was made available to municipalities, it was geared towards addressing some infrastructure needs they may need to address to help their housing needs. Everything will be tied back to their housing needs. And in fact, recent conversations or clarity from the federal government, from Infrastructure Canada, who is now taking the lead role on funding that flows to the province and the municipalities on this on infrastructure or housing needs. It's quite clear that their funding will be tied to established or infrastructure and transportation plans. So if a municipality is not there, they won't be able to tie into the funding, and we will help them get there.
Thank you, Deputy. MLA Sheehy-Richard, MLA White, and then MLA Hanson. MLA Sheehy-Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to talk, another thing that I've heard about and hear about is the wait lists. So I guess I'm going to be blunt and say, are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Like, where are we on the wait lists?
Deputy Rayfuse?
I'm going to assume you mean the wait list for the Public Housing Agency. So as you may have heard, we are currently, or the team is going through that wait list and reviewing aspects of the individuals on there to see if, first of all, if they are still require public housing needs, or whether or not their needs for public housing have changed, which would change the aspect of which they're eligible for, those types of things. So that is a continuing process. The wait list, I don't know if it's changed or not changed. I'm going to ask Pam to comment on that in a second here. But it is an evolution as we go through this process to update the individuals on it, and as we move people through as quickly as possible from I'm going to call it the normal wait list and then the priorized list associated with public housing. We are continually trying to address it at the same time as we work through the policy objective and make sure that the right individuals are on the list. Pam, you want to come in?
Ms. Manchetton?
Yeah. Our key goal is to make sure we're getting people off that wait list as quickly as we can. And so I'll say that we've been able to shave 10 weeks on average off that wait time, which is something that we're working toward every day to make sure that we house people as quickly as we can, as I mentioned. We've increased our turnaround times, so that's changing. When people move out, we want to flip the unit as quickly as we can to make sure that somebody can move in. So we've increased that by 21% over this time last year. And we're also working on, I'm just trying to think of what else I had written down here. So we mentioned earlier, too, that the vacancy rate has dropped considerably. So now we're hovering at about 2%, which is, again, a historic low for us. So that's really, that what we're targeting, just trying to get people moved into homes and have roofs over their heads as quickly as possible. And the wait list is, something like Deputy had mentioned that we are looking at now. We're doing a comprehensive review of the wait list and checking with folks. It really comes down to individual phone calls to ensure that people are still in need of housing or still eligible for housing. So that's a process that we're going through right now.
Thank you. MLA Sheehy-Richard for a follow-up.
So I do have a quick follow-up. Sticking with my theme of the 4 zones, districts, can you give me an average wait time in each of the areas? Like, are one of the areas a longer wait time than another, like where we were breaking them down?
Ms. Manchetton.
Yeah, I don't know if I have that specific data here, but I can tell you that in Metro, generally it takes longer, and Western, for some reason, takes longer for housing or for people to become housed in those areas. But I can share those numbers with you after the committee.
Thank you. MLA White.
Thank you, Chair. The last while back, I've been looking at my community with various, we happen to have 2 very large schools that were left vacant for the last couple of years, and I got to say, it frustrated myself, it frustrated a lot of the community, because we have people living in the streets with nowhere to go, and we got these buildings that were moved out of classrooms. Like, I taught in one myself, and we came out, and the building was left to be to the point now where you could drop this from inside of the hole in the ceiling. Like, it's so then you have homes that live close to it that are an eyesore for them. And so I guess my question is about inherited buildings and how many units that can provide. But realistically, it's more about, like, I don't want to take away from what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create housing first and foremost, but isn't it a double bang for the buck when we rehabilitate a building, remodel a building? Doesn't that help? I mean, it creates more units. I know they're older units, so the maintenance is another issue on that. So I guess my question is, with the inherited buildings, are we able to add many units to the stock? I guess is what I'm asking.
Deputy Rayfuse.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to open a comment, and I'll maybe pass it on to you. But sometimes it's not as easy as you think, is to convert an inherited building into something that's appropriate for housing, particularly if we're trying to address the needs of the homeless. It does sound great, and it does sound fast, but a lot of these buildings wouldn't be code acceptable for individuals living into them. They're not great spaces to provide the wraparound services that are required for the individuals. So it is very difficult, and sometimes it's even more expensive than starting afresh to rehabilitate an existing building, even though it looks great. So there may be some circumstances where it does work well. If you notice that it recently, although it wasn't this department, it was Department of Community Services, is that they rehabilitated an underused church in Dartmouth for a shelter. That had to go through an extensive period of renovations before we or they were allowed to put people even in a shelter circumstance. So it's something that's always looked at, but it's sometimes a lot more difficult than one would believe.
MLA White for a follow-up.
Possibly. We actually have a church that's being renovated as well in town. It's going to make 16 units, and but I guess it would almost, if it's a question, maybe not. But it seems like the private sector is able to do that much cheaper and much more economically than the government is to be able to renovate something. I don't know if it's because of union wages or requirements or what, but I do realize I have a background in construction. I realize you're looking at fire escapes and everything else, and windows and water supply to get upstairs as well. When you're a classroom, for example, you're not looking for water, but to live there you need hot and wastewater as well. So I do get it that the cost is there, but given that it's eliminating an eyesore in the community for the people that already live there, and then also providing housing, I just sometimes wonder, is it worth it? I really think that there's a thing to look at there, but you guys know it's a question, but it's not a question. Thank you.
We'll just let everybody ponder on that. Thank you, MLA White. MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is, I'm just going to ask a direct question from Halifax Needham. So we've had a number of clients that have gone through, and it's going to be through public housing, so probably yourself, Pam. A number of clients who go through our office in particular, because we know that when they go through the Provincial Housing Authority, they receive a number of backlash, or they're mistreated, or they're dismissed. And so we got a message yesterday from one of the clients' from one of the managers that said, when they go through our office, there's nothing else that they can do on their end. And I said, well, really, like, there's nothing that we can advocate for on their behalf, and I'd have to go through whoever the direct person is from that area. And so I thought that was really odd that I would get from one of the the property managers that when they go through our office, through the MLA office, that the property manager no longer deals with that. And so I'm just asking, this is why I asked about policy, because, you know, there's a number of things that have changed, and a lot of the things we are unaware of. And so when it comes down to our clients to do the best work for our clients, they're coming to us because there's clearly an issue, and we try our best to work with the department. And when we're told that when a client comes to our MLA office and that once they're there, there's nothing else that they can do through the property management side, there's an issue, because I really feel like I need to be able to address something. So what would you suggest, or what is a process that could happen if a client comes to our office and is asking for help? Is it someone in particular that I have to speak to directly about an issue with housing?
Ms. Minchinton.
So you should be able to deal with the office, the Metro office, for example, in your circumstance, or you can come to me, but that's not a policy. So I recognize your role, which is to advocate for your constituents, and we advocate for clients and for tenants as well. So it should be more of a partnership approach than anything, and that's what I'd like to see going forward. There's a lot of culture changes that we're trying to make with our organization. Like I said, we've been in place now for about a year, and that's something we're working really hard on, and changing some old policies and old ways of thinking. And bringing all of that up to date. So if there is an issue, I really want to talk to you about that, especially if it's happening over and over again. So can we have it offline? Okay, that would be great. That should not be happening.
Emily Hanson, follow up.
Thank you very much. And I knew that would be the answer. I just thought it was odd yesterday that I received that. Like, I spoke to someone about that, and I said, I need to meet with someone. Who do I talk to? And so now I'm glad that we're able to have that conversation. We'll do that shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next questioners will be MLA McDonald, MLA LeBlanc, and MLA Dually. We have the time. MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's what happens when you get smart. So you made me lose my question. I hope you're happy. You're happy. Oh, okay. So there's been discussion over here, around here, about the 30%, 50%, what it's supposed to be. What I'd like to know is, I understand we have different zones everywhere, but what is the average rent that's charged? And I know it's going to be different for others, so I'm not sure who's going to take that one. And then what's our high and low? So I'd like to know, like, what is, when it comes to affordable housing, what is our lowest rent? What's our average, right? What's our lowest and what's the highest? Like, you don't have to be down to the cent. You can give me a ballpark into that. And I know Ms. Machenza is looking, smiling, and Ms. Lopez is looking, so I may have two answers, Mr. Chair.
Well, we'll begin with Ms. Minchinton.
I believe you're speaking about public housing, is that correct? Yes. So the average rent is about $491 a month for one person. Is that what you mean? Bedroom. Or for one bedroom, sorry, yes. And then the highest rent goes up to about $2,000 a month. So there's some things we need to bring some consistency to, and we're looking at all of that again. This is really a big part of why we've become an agency, is to bring some consistency and uniformity to how we apply our policies and processes right across the province. So that's, we're looking at we have some legacy portfolios where the rents are different. They were inherited, they were given to us by CMHC, and so that's something we'll be looking in the future to, figure out how we're going to consolidate all of that. Of course, not without extensive communication with tenants and consultation, so I'll just put that there. The average rent. And I'll let you know, too, that 30% is what we charge for singles and couples and seniors, 25% for families, and then income assistant has its own scale. So they could pay as low as $175 a month.
Thank you, and I apologize. I've been mispronouncing your name the entire afternoon, I believe. It's Ms. Minchinton. So, thank you. Ms. Lopez, did you want to address, did you have something to address there?
We weren't sure what program.
Okay, all right. MLA McDonald, you're good?
I'll be nice.
Okay.
Always.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you. Just like I've always been smart. I didn't just get smart. I want to talk more about the rent supplement program, and just that, so generally with public housing, rent is, you just mentioned the ratio, so 30%, 25%. But with the rent supplement, there's set averages for certain regions. For example, a one-bedroom in Halifax is calculated based on a rent of $1,032 a month. So I'm wondering how often those rents or those averages are recalculated, and are we basing those calculations on out-of-date data?
Ms. Elliott-Lopez, and you just have over about a minute or minute and a half to answer the question. Sorry.
It's a quick response, actually. Thank you. So they're updated yearly, and they're provided to us by CMHC.
Right.
Ms. LeBlanc, MLA LeBlanc, do you have a follow-up?
Well, I just wondering, you know, Ms. Elliott-Lopez, if you can comment on the out-of-date part, because yes, we get them from CMHC, but they get them from somewhere, or they, you know, where are they getting them, or how are they calculating them? I'm just like, the fact is that it's really hard to find a one-bedroom apartment for $1,000 in Halifax right now. So it seems to me that seems like a strange number to use.
Ms. Elliott-Lopez.
Yeah, so in conversations with our CMHC colleagues, it's a very complex formula that they use. I believe that they are looking at it, and we're continuing conversations with them. But for now, that's what we're provided, and that's what we use.
Okay. So, MLA Duwali, you have the last 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, my question is, Michael, for me, I come from public service, and I'm actually having this concern. We saw a couple of days ago, the bridge was closed, and there was a fire because of the encompassment. In my constituency, there is somebody right now, the Highway 102 have a tent. And my question is, do you see in this homelessness any public safety coming from this if this continues the way it's going? And who will be responsible for this? Thank you.
So, thank you. Who is that addressed to, MLA Dwellin? So, Mr. Catlin, we are up against the clock as far as a lot of the answers that we could provide now. Is there a way you could address that in your closing statement? You have an opportunity to close now, so that concludes our question and answer session. So if there's a chance you could address that in your closing statement, you have a couple minutes to do that. Mr. Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. MLA Duwali, to answer your question, we have building codes in housing for a reason, because that's how we know you can safely live. Unfortunately, we don't have that for encampments because it's not meant to be a long-term living solution. So yes, there's an inherent public safety risk. I think even to recognize in HRM, the team that reports on homelessness reports into the public safety unit, just to recognize everyone who serves this recognizes if you're not in stable, safe, secure housing, there's a risk to your own safety and to the public around you. So yes, whose responsibility is it? Government represents us. You represent us at all levels. It's your responsibility because it's our responsibility as a society to take care of those of us who can't take care of themselves. And I think that feeds well into my closing statement, which is remembering, as we talk about the need for affordable housing, as we talk about how we make more happen, I think we often forget the type of people are not any different than any of us, and how many of us or how many of those people that we know and we walk by with that have served us our salad at lunch today or are in this room today are one really terrible situation they didn't see coming from being someone who needs the type of solutions and the type of or living in the type of problems we talked about today. And so I always feel it's important to end on and focus on that these are people who need help, and it's not how much is too much to spend when we talk about helping our fellow citizens, recognizing it could be any of us. And I think how many people, as you started, MLA Hansen, today, with that unfortunate death in the encampment, how many times does that have to happen until we realize it doesn't have to? And all it takes is investment, and there's lots of good people today that are willing to step up and make use of that investment. And again, not to criticize or detract from our government, who has made some of the most meaningful investments and some of the most significant spending in generations on this file, but I'd just like to highlight we need more. And on behalf of our community, we need more.
Thank you, Mr. Catlin, for coming today. Deputy Minister Rayfuse, do you have any closing statements?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I have no closing remarks other than say thank you to the committee for the questions.
So thank you once again to all of you who've come in. You've provided some great information, and it's been a great conversation around the table this afternoon. So we're going to take about a 3-minute recess to allow for our witnesses to leave the room, and then our committee will re-adjourn to go over some committee business. So thank you once again for coming. Oh. Well, no, that's okay. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you. I've got my business card here if anybody.
All right. Order. So we will reconvene to go over some of our committee business. The first letter of business is a correspondence received on October 30th and a letter from Christina King, the Director of Governance and Accountability Unit in the Executive Council Office. It was response to information in a motion passed at our September 5th, 2023 meeting. All the members have received it, and again yesterday. So was there any other discussion? I know MLA Dually had brought it up earlier, but is there any other discussion on that particular topic? Okay. Seeing no other discussion on that, we'll move on to other correspondence that was received by from Deputy Minister Candace Thomas. It was in response to requests for information made at our October 3rd meeting. And this again was forwarded to all the members of our committee. Was there anybody that had any discussion about that correspondence that was sent by Deputy Thomas? Nope, seeing none, okay. I'll move on from that. Is there any other business? Sure, yep. Okay. MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward a motion to write to the department because we know that the most recent by name list for HRM shows that there are 1,066 people who are actively homeless in the city, and we know that this number is much greater province-wide. Last week, a father of two died in Dartmouth in a Dartmouth tent encampment due to what's been reported as carbon monoxide poisoning from the heater used to keep his tent warm, and we heard about that today, about public safety and the safety for others. We've heard today that there's a concern this tragedy will be repeated without immediate and decisive action from this government. So, you know, we know that the homeless numbers are rising and winter is here. Temperatures are now consistently zero, and yet this government still has not offered a plan to see all of these people housed. Not some, but all. This has reached the level of an emergency and needs to be addressed as such. So I move that this committee write a letter to the Premier and members of the Executive Council to urge the government to address this emergency by taking immediate action to safely house all Nova Scotians facing homelessness by immediately working to open as many shelter and supportive housing beds as there are people sleeping out of doors, creating a housing, communication, and transportation plan to direct people to shelter, and banning winter evictions to prevent this crisis from worsening.
Okay, thank you, MLA Hanson, for that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? I believe MLA Ritzie had wanted to make a discussion, and MLA Clark after that. So MLA Ritzie.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what? As you can tell, we are taking this issue very seriously, and actions are the priority here. We've implemented the 5-year housing plan, which was released back in the fall in October. It's tabled by the department and released publicly. And it's, I guess for me, the department, again, other departments that partnered within this decision, like Community Services, announcing the opening of the 24/7 shelter on Windmill Road for people 16 and over and all genders. The shelter currently has 80 beds, and it will be expanding shortly to 100. Work is being done. Our government is taking this very seriously, and while we can understand the intention of this motion, we cannot support it.
MLA Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm disappointed to hear that from the government side, and I do just want to say that I agree with the motion. I think as with all motions, it's not binding. It doesn't mandate that the government spend $200 million tomorrow. It's simply a goal, and I think a fairly humane and moral goal, right? Because having 1,000 people living outside in our city is a failure of a whole bunch of different actors over a long period of time, but it's a moral failure too, to see people being outdoors and being uncomfortable and in pain, and in the worst case scenario, dying. That is what happens, unfortunately, when people are put into these circumstances. And I appreciate in particular the part of the motion around communications and transportation, because when we have people living outside who may not have a cell phone, may not have any access to information that we take for granted. It's incumbent on government to do that work for these people so that if there is an option for them, they know about it and they're able to get there. It's not enough just to say we have beds, here's the bed, and let's take you there. Right? Let's make sure that you have somewhere to stay tonight. So I think it's an important motion. I think while there is some work underway, there's still going to be hundreds and hundreds of people this winter who will have nowhere to go, and I think that's a real shame and a very dangerous situation for far too many people. And with that, I will finish. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Emily LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have to say I'm also very disappointed. Listen, St. Paul's Church is in my riding, and I'm quite happy that shelter is there, relieved. Happy to hear. I didn't hear that now it was up to 80, because when it was first announced, it was a 50-bed shelter that could move to 100. And of course, my initial reaction was, well, there's probably 100 people living in tents in Dartmouth North alone, let alone anywhere else in the city. So the fact is that yes, the shelter is important and good, and I'm glad you've mentioned it, but there are 1,068 people in need of shelter tonight. 1,068, and that shelter has 80 beds, and then we've got a couple of others. We got Turning Point, we got the usual shelters, which are just always full because they just hardly ever change over anymore because people just live there now. And so I'm shocked to hear that this committee, it's not even like you folks aren't speaking for the government. All we're suggesting is that we write a letter to the Premier to say, take a hard look and make sure that these 1,000 people have a place to sleep before it's too late. And unfortunately, it is too late for some people. People are dying or staying in terribly unsafe situations to avoid being in a tent. And put a pin in that for a second. And I also just want to reiterate that, it is important to have an emergency plan. For those people who won't go to a shelter, for all of the reasons that we know that people won't go to a shelter, we need to know how they're going to get inside in a weather emergency. I have, every time we've had a bad weather call, hurricane or massive snowstorm or whatever, I've got like 15 calls to my office saying, what are we doing with the people in the tents? And it's like, I don't know, what are we doing? So then we call like Halifax, Department of Community Services, whoever, and it's very hard to figure out what the plan is, and it seems like it's a different plan every time. So I think all of these things are actually like on the ground, real important issues, and I think I would love for you to take a second sober thought and second thought and change your mind.
Thank you. MLA White.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I'm not a typical member on this committee. I'm a substitute sitting here today. What? I'm a substitute teacher here, substitute. So, but in all seriousness, there are 1,068 people living homeless in the city, and declaring a state of emergency by the province, there will still be 1,068 living homeless tomorrow. The fact is, the municipalities have the authority to declare a state of emergency as well. And I truly don't think that the province declaring a state of emergency actually releases any extra money to do anything for it. I mean, we just had a great committee meeting, and I believe MLA Hanson asked for recommendation on declaring a state of emergency, as New Brunswick did, and I'm pretty sure we can go back and check the records, but I'm pretty sure the answer was no, not to do that. That's what I thought that I heard anyway. So the answer was to invest. That's what the answer was, to invest in housing. And we are a government that has committed to $1.7 billion in the next 5 years. So I don't know what a state of emergency is going to do to help that. And look, if I thought it was going to put a roof over people's houses tomorrow, I would absolutely support that motion. I would. But I do not see the sense in declaring a state of emergency when it's not going to address the issue. And the reality is that the acts that the government takes, and Look, when you're in a leadership role, as a firefighter, when you're in a leadership role, if you panic, everybody around you panics. No, excuse me, I'm speaking. I want to say this. In a state of emergency by the province that has no extra funds and no authority with it, is a panic move when the municipalities have the authority to do this already if they thought it was better, and it doesn't release extra money. So, as I said, if I thought it did something, if I thought it released more money, if we could say state of emergency and there's a new bank account they can go to, absolutely. I would do that in a minute. I would be there with my tool belt on, I'd help you build it. But I don't see it as being productive right now. I just don't.
Thank you, MLA White. Just to be clear, the motion does not say anything about a state of emergency. I just wanted to clarify that for the record. But I appreciate your comments on your concerns about that, a few things there. MLA Hansen.
I'd like to call the question because we want to make sure that folks understand that we are just asking the government we're writing a letter to the government to consider this and to make sure that there are as many shelters, supportive housing beds as there are people sleeping outdoors. It's -5, -8 tomorrow, -7, -5. So I want to call the question. Can we do that, Mr. Chair?
I want to make sure that all the members have had an opportunity to speak. I mean, all the members of the opposition have had an opportunity to speak. I think it's only fair that we allow the government caucus to have an opportunity to share their views. MLA Sheehy Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I just sat before a committee and listened to Ahan's talk specifically about the fact that, you know, in decades, our government has done more in decades than has been done in decades. And I think it's evidenced by my comments, MLA Ritzy.
Order. Sorry, that concludes our meeting for this afternoon. Our next meeting will be January the 11th, 2024, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. This committee had agreed to hold this meeting on this date because the first meeting was going to be, the first week of the month was going to be during the holidays. The witnesses will be from the Department of Labor, Skills and Immigration, RE Modernization, Accessibility and Harmonization of Safety, Regulation and Services for today's workforce. So that concludes our meeting. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.